All right, everybody. Hello, it's Michael Shermer, and it's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show, brought to you by the Skeptic Society and Skeptic Magazine. Here's our new issue. It just came out. It's a little glossy there. It is for color. On energy matters. You know, we've been doing matters theme issues. We did trans matters, abortion matters, race matters, nationalism matters, economic matters, and the latest one on energy. Where do we get energy? Do we really need to get rid of fossil fuels completely? Well, eventually, probably, but you can't do that without nuclear, we think. So we push nuclear in the issue. In any case, it doesn't matter. Just check it out. Go to skeptic.com/magazine and order your new issue or subscribe, or you can just go to your local bookstore and pick up a copy there. Okay. Today is a really important, timely, and controversial subject on cancel culture. In fact, the title of the book is called Canceled. The Left Way Back from Woke by Umut Özkirimli. And he is a senior research fellow at the Barcelona Institute for International Studies. He's a professor at Blancanera and a senior research associate at CIDOP, which is the Barcelona Center for International Affairs. His writings have appeared in The Guardian, Open Democracy, Times Higher Education, Huffington Post, among others. You can find him online, check the show notes below, and we'll have links to the new book, which I just finished reading this morning, actually, Umut. And it's infuriating to revisit all these crazy stories of cancel culture on the left and right. And each side says that it's not happening. But, you know, every one of your chapters has endless stories of canceling. So apparently it is happening. But before we get into that, just give us some background. What led you to write this book? Why did you become concerned about this? I guess I should ask, what is your political affiliation or orientation? Because that seems to matter to people when you talk about these subjects.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Well, I mean, I would describe myself as a left-wing progressive, without any doubts and any card carrying, right? That's what they say. Well, in U.S. standards, actually, you know, I felt the need to openly declare this, because a lot of the people who've read the book, well, before publication, including the anonymous reviewers, thought that I had to deal with the issue of, okay, I mean, you're talking about liberalism, right and left. Okay, you have to come clear. Are you a classical liberal? Are you a libertarian? And all of that. And I've seen from Wikipedia, well, I knew of the Skeptic, but I know from your own Wikipedia article that you define yourself, I think, as a libertarian.
I have, yes. Although the word, as you know, these words are labels, and the labels carry a lot of baggage.
Exactly, and they keep changing. I mean, you know, it's not only from person to person, context to context, but also they evolve. So I decided to call the project that I'm, you know, basically I would most identify myself with is democratic socialism. But obviously, I know that this term has a completely different meaning in the United States. And actually, part of this democratic socialist tradition right now is very much associated or affiliated with the woke version of identity politics, identity activism that I criticize in the book. So I would be much more closer to a more kind of, in a Western continental European sense, social democracy, etc. You know, strong state, trust, solidarity, egalitarianism, etc. Where do I come from? Well, I'm a political scientist, and this is my 7th book, but I never thought that I would write this book. Well, I guess you are familiar with a little bit of the background of the story, but also from your own life experiences, let's just say lived experience. I was writing mostly, I've just realized when I was listening to some of your podcasts that you did, especially on nationalism, that is where I come from. That is my real area of expertise, political scientist specializing on issues of nationalism, nation state, identity, obviously. And what I was thinking, obviously, a lot of things have happened in my life in the last 5 years. But before that, I was thinking I would slowly move on to issues of far right, populism, that kind of stuff. But then things changed a lot. Well, obviously, first of all, of course, there was a huge personal trauma involved. I lost my little boy to cancer. We lost our little boy to cancer. I was living in Sweden back then. And then after that, I was subject to a state-supported campaign of cancellation myself on the basis of not only false allegations, but non-existing allegations, basically. And then I had to fight. Well, I mean, this started while my son was actually receiving treatment. So in the last 6 months of his life, I did pay a lot of, my family too, I mean, in many ways, a heavy price for that. Not materially or financially, at the beginning at least, but in terms of, you know, emotional suffering, because, you know, I spent a lot of time that I could spend with my son dealing with stupid bureaucratic issues. Then we lost him. I just came to Spain, decided to relocate here. And then this cancel thing has taken on a new meaning in 2020. You know, I became a trending topic on Turkish Twitter for about a couple of hours. Never thought I would be that way. I mean, I am relatively known in activist circles and as an academic, especially for people who work on nationalism. But this wasn't the way, the reason why I became a trending topic. Within 24 hours, bogus allegation of non-defined harassment has turned me into some sort of a serial rapist who is at the same time a terrorist who is working against the Erdogan regime in Turkey.
Wow.
Yeah, and then, you know, the usual stuff. We can talk about it later on. But then, you know, at the end of a year-long battle in Sweden, because I didn't trust Turkish courts and the law and all of that. And Sweden, you know, it was good. Well, this was where things were happening. And in any case, Sweden is #1 in rule of law, in gender equality and all of that. So it made a lot of sense to give a fight there. And I managed to be vindicated. I mean, the perpetrator of the allegations was convicted on 7 counts of gross defamation, which was then reduced to 4 counts. But, you know, the legal process was over. I was vindicated. Everybody came back to me and said, sorry, we took it, you know, we got it wrong. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't cancelled. I never saw myself as a victim. But that was the beginning of a process of soul searching, rethinking, because the people who were canceling me were not the far right. Okay, the state was in, fine. But that they had a different beef with me. But people who were coming after me were so-called progressives, feminists, trans, LGBTQ rights activists, you know, the people that I fought with for several years. So I said, okay, there's something happening. There's something going on here. Maybe I shouldn't be looking at the right, but I should be looking at what passes as the left. Hence the book. Well, then, of course, you know, with 4 years of researching, reading, and writing. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't cancelled. I didn't lose my platform. So I did have publishers. You know, I had people who gave me a chance to recount and to reflect on what I went through. And the output you're holding in your hands.
Very nice. Yes, I want to ask you about how you deal with grief and all that with your son. But if we do that now, I won't be able to continue.
Yeah, me neither.
It's too upsetting. So let's talk about it later. What triggered the initial allegations against you, and then why do you interpret them as being ultimately politically motivated from your own tribe?
Oh no, it was actually, the beginning was personally motivated. I mean, it was. I mean, everything was reflected in a completely wrong light. I mean, and it took me several months to be able to find. And I am, by the way, I mean, I don't have resource. I'm not a celebrity. I don't have financial resources or anything, but I did have access to platforms that I could express myself. I lost everything. I couldn't find a lawyer to speak on my behalf for 3 months. My first
in Sweden,
and in Turkey, because this thing very strategically happened on Turkish Twitter, knowing that it wouldn't hold water outside Turkish Twitter, where 1, I'm not famous enough, and 2, people would ask for evidence, or people would like to see what's behind these allegations. Because, in my case, there were no other people coming forward, nothing before or afterwards, etc. And this person who came up with the allegations was someone that I had a relationship with for a couple of months. It was presented as a case of academic Me Too, the Turkish academia's Me Too moment. It wasn't, because this person and I met outside academia. She came to Sweden to be with me and my son. So it was we were looking for basically at some point there were ideas, maybe a future or whatever, but it wasn't a serious relationship. It ended, we broke up. But then something really odd happened. We got a European grant, which was worth 200,000 euros. That was an application we made earlier, after everything was over. And I received an email, literally blackmail email. Everything is in writing. Everything is presented to the courts, several courts in Sweden and in Turkey. I really don't know how many, but at least a dozen courts. And this note told me that if I don't give up the project, whose idea was mine, that this person was going to submit a file of harassment against me to the university. The timing was crucial. She knew that we were about to take our son for a final trial in Barcelona. The mother of my son, who was a very close friend of mine, still is, my co-warrior, she said, you have to give this up. I mean, you can't deal with this right now. In any case, it won't be a good idea to work together in a project. So I did withdraw from the project, but I did, I informed everybody that I'm doing this simply because I want to focus on my son. But this person, even after this, filed this complaint of non-defined harassment. There was no investigation, no proper investigation, nothing. They call it in Sweden, it's nothing like Title IX regulations, because, now I'm an expert on various different things. Laura Kipnis's work was the first book I've read, Unwanted Advances. I know what is a Title IX regulation and dear colleague letters and everything. I've done my homework. In Sweden, they just hire a company from outside, they pay them a lot of money, and that is what is called a psychosocial investigation. The person who does this does not have any qualifications, doesn't consider evidence, doesn't do anything, literally. And I was at the same time commuting between Barcelona and Sweden because my son was there receiving treatment, and I had to go back once in a while there. This is just a coincidence. On the 1st of June 2018, the investigation basically ended, and I was basically acquitted. I mean, there was no allegation of harassment, but the university said, look, as a senior scholar, you should have been more careful, so don't do this again, type of warning, which has no legal force, and it's not a harassment finding. Actually, 1 year later, the person, the dean, who signed this thing, testified on my behalf in court. I mean, saying that, no, there was no allegation. There was an allegation of sexual harassment, but there was no finding of sexual harassment. This is not about harassment. It's just a senior scholar maybe acting somewhat. I did reject that as well, but it didn't matter. So the same day, this is just a coincidence. I mean, obviously, I cannot blame anyone for that. But on the 1st of June was also the day we had to take our son home because there was nothing else to be done anymore. And 1 month later, he passed away. On 5th of July, a couple of weeks' time, is his anniversary, 5th anniversary of his death. So obviously, I didn't pursue this any further, other than, when I heard that this person was still talking about me in different, academia is a small circle, so I was hearing things. So I sent a cease and desist letter through my lawyer in Sweden. Nothing happened. 2 years later, I was still dealing with these private rumors and all of that, and I found out that actually, even though, I left Sweden with an agreement with the university myself, etc., this person was telling people that I was kicked out of the university for sexual harassment. So the second cease and desist letter went. The person went on to Twitter, solely to Turkish Twitter and launched the campaign. In 24 hours, the Turkish government started an investigation about me, calling me, all the headlines of the Turkish newspapers and all of that. I was on national TV, actually. The terrorist pervert. Yeah, it was amazing. Twists and turns. Obviously, we sued. It wasn't a compensation. I mean, I don't want anybody. I mean, by the way, all of this right now is done deal. It's been almost more than 2 years. The process is complete in Sweden. There are several cases against other people in Turkey. And everything, all the documents are on my website. Anybody who goes to my personal website can read anything they want. I actually, sent and I wrote a public letter to the vice chancellor of Lund University and accused them of not only of enabling this, but also of fraud, because, one reason was, or everything was happening was this 200,000 euros. So I couldn't deal with it, but I had to fight a legal war. I did, I won. And then that was it, basically. The point is, I didn't want to write, about my story. I didn't want to write a revenge thing, which I could have done. But the point is, it didn't matter. I think there's, people who are interested in my story can read about it on my blog or whatever. What I wanted to basically point to was something much more deeper. Why was there no due process? Why did I not even have a chance to speak out? Why, when I did speak out, people said that I was mansplaining this and that, all these new terms. Now, another odd thing happened, and that would really actually, the uniqueness of this story, there are several aspects of it. One is, of course, my personal tragedy, the loss. The second is, of course, the state involvement in a cancel campaign. But there's a third aspect to it, and that's really, this is the story of the prologue. Several feminists in Turkey, women that I don't know of, never met until at that point, in 2020, when I finally managed to publish the documents that basically, verified my own version of the story. They saw through the lies and started to publicly, decipher the twists and turns of the story, and that everything were basically a lie and a story fabricated by a number of people. It was organized. Now, for reasons that are still unfathomable to all of us, these feminists were accused of being, I'm going to use the word, TERFs. Maybe you are familiar with the acronym, maybe you're not.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm sure you're probably most of your, if they're a Skeptic fan, they would know that. But otherwise, it's trans-exclusionary radical feminist. Neither myself nor these feminists in Turkey knew what TERF stood for. All of a sudden, people who were basically chasing up the details of a story of cancellation were accused of being transphobic. And the story has nothing to do with any LGBTQ person. The two main characters of the story are heterosexual people, man and woman, biologically speaking. So all of a sudden, this whole story was interwoven with Turkey's gender wars. And then I said, okay, there's something seriously wrong here. I'm never been a fan of Harry Potter, never read one book, never watched one movie from beginning to end, but I've read everything that J.K. Rowling wrote about, these trans activism and trans rights and biological rights and everything. And I said, well, am I missing something? What is going on here? I've bought several books. All of a sudden, the nationalism student or expert, whatever you want to call it, started to read all these books on feminism, gender. I knew about it, of course, it was part of my education. But yeah, I wasn't into trans rights. I wasn't into LGBTQ. I wasn't into Stonewall. But look, my I'm carrying a book called Stonewall Riots on my desk right now. You know, I've studied, and I saw that nothing made sense in this world. Hence the metaphor of Alice in Wonderland, the rabbit hole. Yeah.
Down you went. Yeah.
Down in.
Yeah. You know, I was just at the Stonewall bar, the bar and restaurant and nightclub there a couple of weeks ago, visiting my adult daughter in New York City. I'd written about it in The Moral Arc, but I never actually attended. And my daughter and I were just aimlessly walking around, and it's like, oh my God, Stonewall. Yeah. We have to go. Right. So it was cool. All right, Umut, I should point out to our listeners, none of this is in your book. This is not what your book is about.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't know any of this because I didn't, do a background search of you because I just want to read your book and understand your ideas. That's the most important thing to me. But since we're on it, now reflecting back, so the accuser, what's the motive there? Let me give you two options that come to mind. You telling me the story now for the first time I've heard it. Was she unhappy with the breakup and it's something along those lines? Or was she feeling like that 200,000 euro was partly her idea and she should have some of that? Or is there something else that I can't even think of?
I mean, it's not my, I don't think it's up to me to speak about that. Sure. I mean, but the point is I know from subsequent events that actually what mattered most was that she didn't like the idea that she came to Sweden through me. She got the award with me and all of that. There was like her career seemed as if she was getting some benefits through this relationship, which to a certain extent, maybe, to a very limited extent did happen. Yeah. I mean, I helped her come to Sweden, but I'm not interested in her career. I was never part of it. And so, I think that was part of the reason, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to think about her motivations and I don't care.
All right. I should point out though, to listeners on how these grants work. It's not like whoever the granting agency was gave you 200,000 euro and said, go have a good time. I mean, the monies all have to be allocated and clear and transparent. And, here are the salaries, here's the transportation costs, and, everything has to be itemized and approved, and you have committees. So it's not like, anybody that would go after you is just, just give me 50,000 and we'll be done with it.
Exactly.
It doesn't work like that.
No, exactly. I mean, it was a European grant. Now, I mean, there's one thing that I would like to, before we really wrap this up, because I think, as you said, this is not the book. This is my publicist in US, whom I deeply, I care about her. She called it the origin story of the book, which is true. Yeah. This is the origin story of the book in many ways. Otherwise, one thing was really interesting. I mean, these 200,000 euros, I mean, because I was in a grant writing and I prepared the budget with this person. That money was wasted. The person wrote to the European Commission in 2020 and said, well, I couldn't do this, what I was supposed to do, because basically, I was harassed. Now, when I did confront the university, said, look, your employee is found guilty of gross defamation. She's facing criminal charges, criminal conviction. Where is the money? Where is my money? I'm a European taxpayer. I'm a Swedish citizen. Where is my money? And I couldn't find one single Swedish journalist or, Europe in England or anybody who would want to go into this story, because I have the letters of the European Union, of the university and all of that. There's massive fraud. I stand to be corrected, but I mean, 200,000 euros have been wasted. Nobody is doing anything about it. It's an amazing setup.
Wow. Okay, let's get into the broader issues here. I think your story nicely illustrates one of the debates about cancel culture. You're not canceled. You have a published book. You have a university position. But on the other hand, the going through the last 5 years, you wasted a massive amount of energy, time, emotions, not to mention dealing with your son's cancer and all that at the same time. So it does have an effect, even if you're not officially canceled. J.K. Rowling, she can't be canceled, richest woman in the history of the planet. But on the other hand, who wants to deal with this stuff? It doesn't make her happy. It's very stressful. And that's true for most of these people. you know, these comedians that get canceled, but they still have a job or they still appear at nightclubs. Yeah, but that's not the only issue. And so this kind of brings to mind, you know, to what extent you discussed this in your, I think, the first chapter, that, you know, to what extent, how extensive is this? You know, how many people are actually gone after? How many of these campus protests are there? This is an observation I've made, because before COVID, I used to do maybe a dozen to 24 university talks. And if you watch Fox News, you know, it's like every campus has these, you know, outbursts and crazy protests and the blue-haired students running around with signs, screaming and yelling. But if you go to these campuses, you don't see any of that, right? So it's like, well, where is this happening? And it could be a small minority. It doesn't happen often, but it sends a message to everybody else, you know, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down. I don't even want to be associated with any of this craziness. I'm just going to, you know, not deal with that. And that's the effect of cancel culture.
Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, the question of what is, you know, what did you lose out of this cancel culture? It's the wrong question. You know, I mean, we can, you know, I'll just come back to that. But there's first of all, I mean, one thing that we need to set to set the record straight. I mean, first of all, I mean, Fox News and the right has nothing to complain about these things. I mean, they're the biggest cancelers on earth. Look at the just anti-critical race history, you know, bans, the book bans and everything. I mean, the figures that I used in the book were 2022 figures, the latest figures from Pan America. And when I was just revising them to be able to kind of refresh my memory before this podcast, 42 states were involved in these kinds of bills. In 2023, there are more of them. That doesn't include the cases of several academics who are canceled for sympathizing with Antifa, being pro-Palestine. The accusation of, you know, any word about Israel comes with the package or whole package. Oh, he's an anti-Semite, she's an anti-Semite, this and that. So the right is, you know, I mean, you know, it's not I don't care about them. They are my enemy. I consider them as my enemy. And the reason why I'm so worried about the left slip into this kind of illiberal, almost fascistic discourse is because it's impairing our work, our political work. I mean, our ability to struggle with the right. I mean, they're the ones who cancel. They're the ones who've been doing witch hunts. Yeah, Red Scare. I mean, we just had an interesting podcast with a friend from Brooklyn, you know. I mean, and in the book I used the term, once it was the commies, today it's the wokies. And if we didn't have cancel culture, they would have invented a new enemy. Which
so here, just to be clear, you're referencing the banning of books that are related to Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, anti-racism,
yes, and LGBTQ issues,
LGBTQ Project 1619, all that.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So these are like banning of books from public schools that are taxpayer funded, that kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, they're not. Well, they're trying to get into the universities as well right now, especially attacking the whole institution of tenure. But of course, it's much more difficult. So the reason why I wrote this book, or the reason why what I'm making all these arguments, is not because I'm establishing an equivalence, you know, sort of between the right and the left. No, the right is creating and whipping up a moral panic. We know that. But there are two issues. One, you brought them up. You said, yeah, what's the broader message of these limited numbers of incidents? And second, the second one is the one I'm trying to bring up. I mean, like political implications of this. I mean, why should I be aping or imitating the right if I have a different ideology? I mean, why shouldn't I you know, this is just canceling. I mean, what about, you know, the anti-racism and all of that, which, of course, you know, a lot of the book is devoted to these things. It just, I mean, for me, as a political strategy, it doesn't work to begin with. And I'm not the only one. I mean, there are several liberals, centrists, progressives who are making similar arguments.
Okay, now, when you say the right is whipping up something of a witch hunt, like a Red Scare, but the examples they give, like, look what they did to J.K. Rowling. Everybody goes, yeah, that's horrible. And you write about this. So it's not that they're lying. It's that that they're tilting toward one end and not acknowledging their own censoriousness on their side.
Yeah, And I mean, they're creating a kind of, I mean, it's a really, I mean, I did use this classic by Stanley Cohen, you know, the moral panics and all of that. I mean, it's like, the starting point of Stanley Cohen is that it's not that there's nothing there. There is something. But moral panic happens when you take this out of its context, you blew it out of proportions, and then you pass it on to. But the point is, the left is also doing these things. I mean, it's not that the left doesn't have a. I mean, you know, the whole LGBTQ issues right now is discussed in very kind of similar ways to what the right is doing. I mean, like, if you ask questions about what a woman is, biological sex versus sociological construct of gender, you come up with, I mean, you're accused of actually committing a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
The existential threat. I mean, isn't this some sort of a moral panic as well? I kind of think it is. I mean,
yes. I mean, just following Twitter since today is Thursday, since Monday, when bouncing around the internet was that post from Johns Hopkins University Press Dictionary of LGBTQ issues, defining a lesbian as a non-man attracted to another non-man.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was The Onion at first, or the other one, Babylon Bee. It's like, how could you make? And yet that was real. I mean,
that was real.
Of course, when the right points that out, they're right. I mean, that's insanity.
They retracted it. I mean, they had to.
It, yes.
Yeah. I mean,
they had
but that's
to.
the thing.
But why would anybody ever think? Didn't somebody inside there go, wait a minute? We have a word for this person. It's called a woman. It's like J.K. Rowling, people that get pregnant. If only we had a word for that person. Who could that be?
Yeah, no. It's exactly, and I mean, that's the point. I mean, it's this whole. I mean, what is progressive or liberal about this? No debate. That's the position of the largest charity in the UK, Stonewall. That was the position. Like, you cannot debate rights. Well, first, because the equation that they're set up is like, if you debate this, rights to clashing rights, you're actually threat. I mean, this is an existential threat to a group of people, obviously a minority and marginalized, highly marginalized group of people. But if this is a false moral equivalence, I mean, it's basically an issue of. I mean, there's a group of biological women who claim that their rights right now are clashing with trans women. And I think this is just, I mean, I don't know who is right, because I'm not well versed in this. Well, I am to a certain extent, but I'm not, a woman. I'm not a trans woman. So, but I don't see why this is not, even debatable. I mean, why can't we just discuss that? Why can't we just think about, like the third categories in sports? I know you're into cycling. I mean, why not? Simple as that. And why, like, certain restriction of certain rights, or to a certain extent, means denial of the existence of a group of people. That's not, this is also a moral panic.
Well, and we don't want to do that. So an open division where, say, male to female trans can compete against other male to female trans, or just men.
Yeah, exactly.
The problem is going the other direction is that, we know it's not fair, because at post-puberty, it doesn't matter how long you do testosterone suppression or other hormone treatments. It just doesn't erase the physical difference. That one's pretty clear now, I think. Much of life I see is conflicting rights. Just take the abortion issue. Exactly. What's the right answer? Pro-life, pro-choice. Well, I'm pro-choice, and I think I make a pretty good argument. But half the country here in America thinks I'm wrong.
Exactly.
All right, and they have their arguments. It's life begins at conception, therefore it's murder, and so on. All right. So at some point, there's no right answer, because science can't tell us when life begins. A Tuesday afternoon at 2:00. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. So you end up at this kind of a political debate, and you can try to get the judges appointed and so on. Or as I'm fond of saying, what's the right percentage of immigrants we should allow into the country. There's no right number. And different countries have different percentages, and it's up to the populace, what democracy is all about. So sometimes I think these conflicting rights, LGBTQ, trans, whatever, it's just you can't have everything. So it's just the way it goes. And so you have to have a debate. That's the whole point of politics. You have to be able to talk about it.
I mean, the reason why I start every chapter of the book with a real life example is because, I want to show the political implications of these all lofty academic discussions or social media bubbles, where we discuss issues. No, it's not that simple. I mean, the first chapter for me, like the first real life story, for those who are going to read the book, or, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but, well, there are no spoilers. The spoilers is the Washington, Women's March in Washington 2017. That's the successful example of, there were pro-life and pro-choice women. There were white women, there were trans women, there were all sorts of things. And that's why, I start with a story, a real life example, and then, which is relevant to the argument that I will be developing in the later part of the book. So that's why I have this one example, the Women's Washington March. Then, of course, in the second chapter, I go into this.
Hang on, Umut, let's follow up with that. Then what happened in the next year, the 2018 women?
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, then identity politics, or what the right refers to as woke, whatever, this radical identitarianism, let's just put it in a most diplomatic and politically correct way as possible, all of a sudden everything collapsed because, there was a group of people who said that the pink pussy hats were actually offending to LGBTQ people. Not to all of them, because, as I give examples in the book, there were a lot of trans women who didn't give a damn about what kind of pussy hat or what color is. I mean, even knitting became an issue. That was really something that I learned while I was writing this book. I mean, because knitting was associated with aristocracy in the 18th and 19th centuries, so it's a bourgeois pastime, okay? So then, there were the issues of, the organizers of the march. One was accused of being, obviously, Linda Sarsour, went through all the things that any Muslim person in the United States went through after 9/11, especially Trumpian years. Then there was another organizer, Tamika Mallory, just because she showed up in a blank a Nation Islam event, Louis Farrakhan. She was accused of being anti-Semitic. And basically, in 2018, the Women's March started to collapse. And I think in 2020, 21, of course, combined with the pandemic, but also post-pandemic as well, there were a couple of thousands of people in a much more limited number of places. Whereas the first march was the biggest civilian event in modern history of United States. And this is according to calculations of academics, not journalistic, crap or whatever. So it disappeared. So this is the thing. I mean, and one of the things that's why, I mean, the other story that I use, well, the people who invented the term identity politics were Black, feminist, lesbian, socialist activists in 1970s. They weren't doing this. They wanted to build bridges, to talk to people. I mean, as you said, how are you going to solve United States or any other places political problems if there is such an important issue which divides the whole society, like into two, splits it into two, pro-life, pro-choice? In other countries, in the country that I was born and raised, it's secularism versus Islam. In another country, it's this versus anti-immigration versus immigration, left, right, you can Brexit, pro-EU, anti-EU, all of these things. It goes on and on. Now, yeah, I don't mean, and that's something that I have to tell in progressive circles when I'm talking to fellow progressives, I'm not saying that we should give platform to Nazis, to fascists, that I mean, Milo Yiannopoulos or Tucker Carlson is like, I mean, they have their platforms. They lose Fox, they get Elon Musk. They have Koch brothers. They will always have their platforms. I'm not saying that we should talk to them. We're not going to change their minds. They're not going to change our minds. But what about the majority? I mean, 74 million people, according to estimates, voted for Trump in 2020, not 16, 20. So a second time. We knew what he was, right? Let's just say that it was anti-systemic protest votes in 2016. 2020, no, it was a different case. 74 million. So were these all Capitol Hill rioters? Were these all fascists, white supremacists? Now, I mean, there are studies which show that among the 700 or something who are arrested for storming the Capitol, there are almost 80%, so we're talking about a huge majority, do not have any links to any white supremacist groups, such as the 3%ers, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers. They are not even working class, they're middle class. Some are CEOs, some are dentists. These are documented. I mean, these are official records. I'm not saying these are...
I know.
I mean, so it's ordinary people.
I know. I talk about that in my conspiracy book because people think, well, these must be all, you know, tinfoil hat wearing wackadoodles living in their parents' basements that are, you know, don't have a job. No, actually, most conspiracy theorists are educated, smart people with regular careers and jobs. In that case, I think the majority of them, it was like, this is my moment, my 1776 moment. I'm going to be the hero.
Exactly.
The boss told us this terrible thing is happening. I'm going down there. You know, and then they get in there and they're walking around taking selfies. I don't know what they think they were going to do if they got in and took over the House chambers, like start voting on bills or something. What do you think was going to happen? I don't know. I mean, more of an emotional thing.
I have quite a few American students. I mean, you know, we have. I mean, I'm teaching in one of Spain's, you know, really kind of high top institutions. Our master's program is, you know, has students from all over the world, and I have like lots of students from United States. And I mean, we watched this. I mean, we found this amazing, I think it was Vice News, 60 Minutes thing about, you know, these guys were looking for, is this where they're taking the decisions? Where is Nancy Pelosi's office? Let me just, and then there were others who were trying to stop them because saying that, oh, it doesn't matter who occupies these chairs, the chairs are sacred. And then you have others, you know, you have the loonies. Of course, this guy was done. I mean, yes. that shaman, whatever.
Yes.
But the point is, you know, it's not them that we need to speak to, or to build. I mean, why are you writing? Why did you spend so many years of your life trying to show that the expose the fallacy and the lies that underlie all sorts of conspiracy theories? Well, you think, because you can get some people, okay? You're not going to maybe convince a flat earther, but not all of them.
Well, what we're after is, in that case, is the undecided voter. That is, people have heard about some of these conspiracy, wonder if there's something to it. Some conspiracy theories turn out to be true. All right, which ones? How should I think about it? What kind of questions should I ask? What kind of sources should I rely on?
Exactly.
That's the most I think we can hope for. Now let's think about for a second the deeper issue behind this whole, like the shift in the 2017 to 2018 Women's March and what happened there. Mm-hmm. I see that happening a lot. There was something in, I think it was 2014, called the Reason Rally. This was, you know, secular humanists, atheists, and so on. Richard Dawkins, the amazing Randy, myself, others. And it was like 30,000 people in Washington, D.C. I couldn't believe it's the most people I've ever spoken to. I'm up on stage going, holy crap, you know, Penn and Teller and, you know, all the kind of classic American atheists and so on. And Dawkins was there. And then the next year they go, okay, let's do it again. It was huge. Let's see if we get 100,000 people or whatever. And then somebody started saying, well, wait a minute. We didn't have enough. We had too many white guys. We got to have fewer white guys and more of this and that. All of a sudden, identity politics. And then the whole thing just fizzled out. They held it, but it was almost nobody was there. Nothing but infighting. I've noticed that's happening a lot. Like you mentioned, affiliated with a libertarian. And so, you know, when I was in college, everybody was reading Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, you know, as college students are wont to do. Yeah. Right. And then, you know, in the 80s, those biographies came out about her after she died. And that basically was kind of a cult. You know, she had this kind of cult following where then they all turned on each other. Like, who was the true objectivist? You know, like, what brand of cigarettes did you smoke? What kind of music do you like? What are the proper movies I should go to? Mm-hmm. And all of this, then all of a sudden there's nobody there at her funeral because everybody had been kicked out of the group. And then I saw this with atheism. You know, after the atheism movement was never very big. And then it got kind of took off with Dawkins in 2006 with his The God Delusion, sold millions of copies. Like, oh, we have a new movement now. And then there was a split of, militant atheists versus more conciliatory atheists. And it's like, oh, you're being too nice to these Christians. We got to make fun of them and attack them. It's like, no, we don't want to do that. So that kind of split everybody up. And then there was this atheism plus movement, which was the plus is social justice. Atheism plus social justice issues, and then that splintered, and no one wanted to join that group. Oh, you checked the wrong boxes, and so on. And my business partner Pat Lindsay, right there, who passed away, she's a bit older than me, but she was an old school feminist from the 60s and 70s, and she said the same thing happened with the who's the true feminist, and then back before that, who's the true Marxist? Are you a Trotskyite or a Leninist Marxist? Like, what? And so it makes me wonder, this must be like in human nature or the nature of social groups. What did Freud call it? The narcissism of small differences?
Minor differences, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
but
what do you think is,
Yeah, but that's it. I mean, for someone who works, who spent 25 years working on nationalism, I can, and I'll do that one day, I mean, I'll write an article on transactivism as nation building. You have the symbols, all the symbols. Flag, you have it. Oaths. I mean, in the latest last week, I was looking at it and I was shocked. The largest college union, trade union in the UK, UCU, they held a meeting to celebrate the Pride Month, and there they asked the whole to chant in unison, "Trans rights are human rights." Which is, of course, true. I mean, there's nobody who would even question that. But I mean, chanting in unison, trans rights are human rights. And then, it made me think of Milan Kundera as amazing passage from The Unbearable Lightness of Being. All extreme ideologies start with, fists like this, hands in kind of a fist form and chanting in unison. Oh, now that's the thing. Now the right always has been doing that fine. Fascism, Nazism, what have you. But yeah, as you said, I mean, Ayn Rand, liberalism, I mean, all these cults. And now the left, or what passes as left. Okay, and that's not something that I understand. I mean, it's when you start feeling at the age of, I'm 53, at this age, feeling like a dinosaur, and that the people that you associate yourself with are the people like the boomers. I've seen the podcast that you've done with this on generations. I'm a Generation X, and my students were millennials, but right now they're fully Z, Generation Z. But the point is, and I do understand. I mean, sensitivities change. Obviously, cultures change. We need to adapt. I understand that. First of all. So that's why, I don't exclude or foreclose discussion about, new rights, trans rights, cultural recognition, all of these things. But foreclosing debate is something that is completely problematic. I'm not saying that everyone should agree with me. I'm just saying that I should be able to talk to people who disagree with me. And I'm hopeful to a certain extent because all my undergraduate students here in Spain, 19, 20-year-olds, they're amazing. I mean, some of them, of course, are born into this, and I live this thing. I learn a lot from them. And I think I'm able to convince them that they should be open to debate. Like I did this little test in one of my classes. I distributed anonymous little papers that said, with one question on, no names, nothing, anonymously. I even left the classroom, said, is J.K. Rowling transphobic? 3 answers: yes, no, don't know. Okay, most of 8. There was, I think we're talking about a group of 37 students. 8 or 9 said we don't have anything. We don't know anything about this. 19 said she is. 8 said she isn't. Okay, then I said, okay, I don't have names, so I'm just going to ask blindly, anonymously, how many people in the whole classroom has read anything, a tweet, an article, a blog, which suggests or which they made them believe that J.K. Rowling is transphobic? Only 8 students. raise their hands. Under the best of circumstances probability, 8 out of 19 students haven't read or seen anything that J.K. Rowling wrote about the topic and still believe that she's transphobic. That was amazing. I mean, small. I know it's just not generalizable. I know it's not scientific, but it shows a lot. But then we had an amazing discussion with, yes, activists. Like one of the famous topics that I like to, I like to provoke my students. It's a lot of, we're having a lot of fun. So just throw in Just Stop Oil and the recent, all these demonstrations, gluing yourself or throwing soup into a Van Gogh and all of that. Because most of my students are environmental activists. And no, they don't support it necessarily. There is no black and white. It's not like, some say, yes, these are necessary to raise awareness because otherwise nobody makes news. But most of activist students, and let me just stress, I'm talking about the Generation Z, 19-20-year-olds, think that this is actually providing, undermining the cause. I'm not saying that. They are saying it. So why aren't we discussing this? Because on social media, that means you're killing the planet.
Right. So when somebody says, throwing soup on a Van Gogh is embarrassing to our environmental movement, you make us look like idiots or terrorists or something crazy. You're saying the majority of, let's say, left-leaning environmentalists would agree with that this is not a good strategy. And yet there's nothing to cover if you don't do something crazy like that. So that's what draws the attention. So again, we're back to that, a minority of people, because the polls I've seen, to what extent do you support the, kind of far left progressive wokeism? It's like 7.5% of Americans, right?
Yeah.
So you can't just say, all Democrats are on board with it. No, actually, most of them are not on board with it. But the ones that don't say anything, or they're quiet, or they're, kind of more strategic in their politics about bringing about social change, they're not going to get any coverage. The ones that get the coverage are the loonies. So that's the problem. And they can drive an entire movement like this, or divide a movement without being in the majority, and, there's studies on this, pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else thinks something.
Yeah.
But if they can't communicate, if they're not allowed to talk to each other, there's no free press, or there's too much censoriousness, then they don't know that most of the people agree with them that these are bad ideas. And so without that, then something like that can float in the ether for quite some time.
And also, there's another argument that I develop a lot in the book. I mean, and that's the progressive part of me. I think the politics comes into, the commodification of identity as well. I mean, we have this, when you start tracing the roots of this craze about identity politics, the new concern, I kind of use this formula, just like a snappy thing, to kind of stick to mind. For the original people, for the Combahee Collective, River Collective, who came up with the term identity politics, it was about politics. So they were doing politics on the basis of identity, of their own identity. Whereas for the new left, or woke left, whatever we want to call it, identity politics is about identity. Now, you're sacralizing something. You're not doing politics for identity. You're just simply trying to protect a sacred value that is worse, actually, because this came from, that's I think the irony of the whole thing, that came out of post-structuralism, postmodernism, relativism, and all of that. And then we end up in moral absolutism. My identity is this, and that's it. You have to accept it. It's not only that I have to accept that you feel like that. It's that if I don't accept it, I am guilty, potentially, of genocide or something else, whatever. And that's the thing. No one talks about the pharmaceutical companies who are behind the puberty blockers and all of that. No one talks about the millions of dollars who have been funneled to Just Stop Oil by the heirs of one of the biggest oil companies in the world. That was revealed in a Guardian article. Yeah. Why did you think that all of a sudden they had all this amazing organization globally? Because they got money.
Yeah, well, in the case of the puberty blockers, the people that are bringing that to our attention, at least here in America, are conservatives. You know, this is Chris Rufo and Matt Walsh and
Yeah,
the Daily Wire,
unfortunate.
Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire. These are, you know, just mainstream conservatives. And, and I'm not a conservative. So it's like, why isn't my team saying, hey, there's something wrong here? And this is the point of your book, is that they've lost the thread of liberalism. So tell us, what is liberalism and why is progressivism or wokeism not really liberal?
Um, well, first of all, I mean, let me just like kind of note that I don't consider the likes of Shapiro or Rufo as mainstream, right? I mean, I would consider
Okay.
them quite far right, to be honest.
Okay.
But I mean, I take my cue from, for instance, there are countries where puberty blockers are now not allowed under a certain age without medical, and proper assessment. And these are countries that are quite social democratic: Sweden, Norway, Denmark. So first of all, yeah, it's not a right wing issue anymore.
Right.
It was like that. You were completely right. It started with right wing, whipping up the scare and everything. But it's right now, in a lot of Nordic countries, this is not allowed. So because there's not enough information. I'm not saying that maybe it will become completely legal in 10 years' time. We don't know. There's simply not enough research to indicate that point. For me, liberalism is, I mean, what I kind of, the starting point of the book is that if there is a retreat from liberalism, that's not only a right wing problem. I mean, what affects, I mean, if we're talking about a tectonic kind of shift to the right, the left is also affected by it. So everything is moved to the right. And I mean, and this is very evident in the way in which I am, or people who say similar things are treated. I mean, I say something, I'm trying to yes, polemically maybe, but I mean, I come up with an argument, and I can tell you that so far, whoever read the book from different sides of the political spectrum, nobody said, "Oh, this is crap." I mean, I find myself lucky because with these books you don't make that much money or anything. What I wanted was to provoke debate, and it's worked. So far, it's been working, um, uh, and that's the point. I mean, I consider myself as left wing because I support strong state intervention in economy, egalitarianism, etc., etc. So basically, that's my left social justice part. But I cannot conceive of any political project which is not liberal. So the political philosophy of liberalism is something that I take for granted. I mean, not everybody will agree with my economic choices. So economic liberalism, neoliberalism, we can, you and I probably we have completely different views about that. I don't believe that market will basically, the invisible hand of Adam Smith will make everything right. Hayek, well, we've seen what Hayek did to austerity measures in 2008 in Europe and everything. So that's a different thing. But political liberalism, which is, well, I mean, basically individualism, freedom of the individual, freedom of expression, freedom of association, everything that comes with it, freedom of conscience that I'm sure you're quite interested in. Actually, your political journey is amazing, from evangelism to atheism. So I mean, this is the thing, and I mean, I'm reading these stories. I mean, this is something I was raised in an atheist family, but that doesn't change the fact that whenever I am outside Turkey, I'm seen as a Turk and as a Muslim by default. I mean, these are categories that stick to you, and it's not easy to. So liberalism is this freedom, and what I find quite problematic with the new woke kind of progressive tendency is this moral absolutism. I mean, and first of all, it's not an objective truth. I mean, it's like it's almost like, yeah, I mean, the right wing uses this metaphor, and I don't want to use it, but I mean, in a way, you bound to me. You can't prove the existence or non-existence of God. And I mean, if someone says, "I see myself as this woman, man, Asian, Native American," that there have been some fraud attempts at this as well. some people have claimed.
Pretendian.
Exactly, pretendians. And I mean, these things do happen. That's one thing. But then, you know, there's also this movement also tells me that I have to accept this at its face value, not question it. Questioning it is causing offense, harm, even existential threat. Well, then, of course, the problem is, well, yeah, I mean, then how do we know? I mean, how am I going to supposed to build a political project, first of all? But also, you know, how am I going to learn? I mean, well, this is very anti-science. Why are we then accusing populists, far-right populists, of being anti-elite and anti-science? The left is anti-elite and anti-science right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, one point you made in one of the chapters was the importance of universalism as a form of liberalism. And that identity politics is the opposite of that. It's saying, no, we're not a universal tribe or group. We're actually divided up by these different, you know, gender, sex, race, and so forth. And
then there's no solidarity. I mean, this argument, some of the kind of refined versions of it, they say that, look, we may be a rainbow coalition. Now, in the as a metaphor, it's nice and it could work, but we know that in reality it doesn't, because you don't accept the other colors of the rainbow. As long as, you know, if as a self-proclaimed progressive, and I mean, it's not like that I'm born yesterday, you know, I mean, as I said, I've been around for 25 years with lots of books around. So anybody who Googles my name could find out about my politics, you know, it's just a click away. So why am I questioning this? Why am I asking questions? Yes, of course, there was a personal kind of starting point, but I'm not asking personal questions because I know what my truth is. I'm asking questions to them.
Yeah. On the identity politics thing, I'm conflicted about this. For example, you know, we had a gubernatorial runoff here in California. One of the candidates was Larry Elder, who is a black radio talk show host who's pretty libertarian, conservative, more libertarian, whatever, somewhere in there. And he was just vilified by the left. So there, it didn't matter that he was black or Supreme Court Justice Thomas. It doesn't matter that he's black. It's the wrong politics. So there, I do sometimes wonder, is it really identity or is it politics or is it context dependent?
Well, I mean, it is about now. At the end of the day, well, I mean, it's one of the things that's in the book. You know, all politics, identity politics. So I mean, but the point is, in this case, you know, identity matters only as long as your identity is, you know, it's the only one that matters, and that's what. Why I use, you know, one of the, if you do find and replace in the book, one of the terms that you will find keep repeating itself is narcissism, you know, and that's one of the defining features of the new kind of politics of identity. It's narcissistic. So it's your identity matters above everything else. But what about others? Okay, so there are lots of black African-American thinkers who are completely vilified just because they hold conservative views. Okay, John McWhorter, Glenn Loury. You think they're right and conservatives? Fine. What about Adolph Reed Jr., who is one of probably is the most famous Marxist black political scientist in the United States? He is trashed in these circles because he's considered to be transphobic. I mean, it's a long story. I'm not going to go into it. But I mean, democratic socialists of Pennsylvania and New York, they canceled the talk he was supposed to give because they said it's an affront.
Right.
I mean, he's Marxist. Right. I'm not saying that Marxists cannot be wrong. Please don't, you know, I don't want anyone to get me wrong. It's just that, I mean, if you, like, out of hand can write people off just because of their identity. I mean, why don't people, like my book, in 24 hours, a number of people just took to Twitter, and because of the title, canceled, and because of its endorsers, it includes, like, there are four endorsers of the book. That's so funny. 2 of them are gender-critical feminists, okay? What these trans activists would call TERFs, okay? It's a slur. I don't use the term. But I mean, you know, there one is a journalist, the other one is a great academic, criminologist, and I learned a lot from her. But the other two, one is Craig Calhoun, he's a sociologist, he's a left liberal, well, I mean, he's a democratic socialist. The other one is a Portuguese human rights activist, gay, and currently he is an advisor to the president of Brazil, Lula. So nobody gives a damn. No, you have these two names and you have a title which says cancelled. Okay, this is dog whistle for the far right. Well, just funny. For God's sake, read. Well, if you're not going to read the book, ignore it, which is what a lot of the mainstream outlets are doing, by the way. Yeah. I mean, in the UK, the book was largely ignored. Even though I do have connect. I mean, The Guardian, I was writing there for 2 years. Well, for some reason, nobody is reviewing the book. I mean, none of the left or left liberal outlets have taken the book.
Well, if I was a conservative, I would love your book because you're on the other team saying that you agree with me about the craziness of the wokeness. You mentioned Glenn Loury. He's certainly a conservative. John McWhorter is certainly not. So it's always interesting to watch the two of them together. They're on all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
talk about these issues.
Exactly. I mean, and you don't need to agree with them. And the point is, I mean, Glenn Loury can be my political adversary. Okay, it's just that I don't see why. I mean, I know that, for instance, you know, I don't know what will happen after this one, but if I were to be on the podcast with Glenn Loury, oh my God, I mean, they will have a field day because, you know, they will say, look, we told you so. Umut is actually a closet right-winger or something like that, you know. I haven't done it, not because, you know, if I am invited, I would go. Why not? As long as I can speak my mind, why shouldn't I?
Of course.
I mean, you know, I haven't read all your books. I know what you think. I know the Skeptic, the magazine I knew. So why shouldn't I speak to you? I mean, I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there I do find it an interesting thing. I just had Heather McDonald on the show. She's conservative, secular conservative. And, you know, so she was going on and on about cancel culture and, you know, you just can't talk about these things. It's like, Heather, we are talking about them right now. And I've seen you on Fox News pretty much every week. So apparently you can talk about it. What you mean is, how come you're not on CNN? She goes, well, they won't invite me. It's like, okay, so maybe that's the problem.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, you know, well, I mean, my book was reviewed in Counterpunch, in a left-wing magazine. It's been reviewed in The Critic, which is a right-wing one. Well, I mean, not far-right or anything. It's like, but the point is, I don't get any invitations from fellow progressives. I mean, so that's kind of, you know, makes me think backwards, okay? Go back in time, 2020, who were the people who were out there to get me? Not, I mean, there was a state, but I mean, that's an authoritarian state, okay? Yeah. So that makes sense. I'm a dissident. Of course, they would come after me. But why did all these people who, you know, who I fought with are doing that? And it's the same thing. Now, if I am to appear on I don't know, like on a more kind of, I guess CNN would be fine for these people. But if I were to appear on, God forbid, Fox News, GB News, on all these things, I'm not even mentioning, okay? But if I were to write, I don't know, in some sort of a right-wing magazine, The Atlantic, which they consider right-wing, what would happen? I don't know. So, I mean, you know, I'm supposed to basically like put a label on the book and say, okay, far-right people should not buy this book. Like something like that, I guess. I mean, you know.
Burn this book.
Burn this book already. Like
Dave Rubin's book title. Yeah, just there again, I guess it's that infighting. Because what's the driver of that? Is it that I have the absolute truth? I know what is right. And you dissent from me just a little bit. You know, we have like 11 of the 12 boxes ticked together, but that one right there, you're out.
Freud.
Why would that be? I mean, is it that, you know, if you have absolute morality, you really should not veer from it. Whereas if you have some degree of fuzziness in there, these are mostly the right principles with some variation that just doesn't feel right to an absolutist.
Well, I mean, basically that's why the left or whatever passes as progressive politics is losing to the right. I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, of course, I'm not talking about the Democrats here. because Biden is by no means, I mean, by any definition, is not a kind of this kind of woke identity politics. I mean, are there people in the Democratic Party like that? Obviously there are. But the point is, the dominant. So I mean, it's like we are losing because we don't produce a vision, we don't produce a story. That's one. And secondly, we don't even try to convince people. I give the example of a Cornell philosopher who says that, you know, rather than talking to Trump voters, we should just go ahead and say, fuck off. I'm sorry to use this word, but this is the word she uses. And it's quoted in the book. So it's a quotation. And I don't,
okay. I can't. You can use that word on this show. It's no problem. Well, so let me read something from your book here. This is in your chapter 3, Identity Politics, on the left. This is from a statement penned by Barbara Smith, her sister Beverly Smith, and Demita Frazier, credited with being the first text where the term identity politics is used.
Yes.
Our politics initially sprang from the shared belief that Black women are inherently valuable. This focusing upon our own oppression is embodied in the concept of identity politics. We believe that the most profound and potentially most radical politics come directly out of our own identity, as opposed to working to end somebody else's oppression. In the case of Black women, this is a particularly repugnant, dangerous, threatening, and therefore revolutionary concept because it is obvious from looking at all the political movements that have preceded us that anyone is more worthy of liberation than ourselves. We reject pedestals, queenhood, and walking 10 paces behind. To be recognized as human, levelly human, is enough. Well, who would disagree with that? That
exactly.
Sounds great.
And these are the people who, you know why they were doing identity politics? Because they felt that at that point in 1970, they were established in 1974. That statement was published in 1977 because they felt excluded by both the Black nationalist movement. I mean, at that was the height of the Black Panther movement and all of that. They were also excluded by feminism, which was dominated by white feminism. They were suffering from huge homophobia because they were lesbians. And as if that was not enough, they suffered because of their politics, socialism, because they were anti-Vietnam. They were, demonstrating in the streets with in support of third world women. So they said, okay, our identity is, everybody talks about intersectionality and everybody credits the person who came up with the term is Kimberly Crenshaw, but they used the term. They talk about in that very statement of interlocking systems of oppression. They say that, in the intersection of all of these things, we have a different kind of identity. But that doesn't mean, and that's something that the more I read about them, the more fascinated I was. And that's why that was the guide, the inspiration that I followed throughout the book. They say we don't believe in a hierarchy of oppressions. We reject Olympics, victimhood Olympics. We believe in community activism. Okay, so it happens in real life. This is something that also affected a lot of the beginnings of Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, one of the best books that I've read during in this process is Alicia Garza's 2020 memoir, The Purpose of Power. She says you don't start. I mean, she is the one who created the hashtag Black Lives Matter, but she tells people in that book and all the activists who come talk to her, you cannot create a movement out of a hashtag. You have to go door to door. You have to do the messy work of politics, talk to people, try to convince them, build coalitions. That's how you get the solidarity. This is what these Barbara Smith, Demita, and Beverly were saying, and they're still alive. But you don't see their names in fancy Ivy colleagues or anything.
Right. Why is that?
Well, that's something, I know the answers, but it's because they have their memoirs and they have oral history, long works. Because they say things that the current woke climate would not welcome. These things that I said, I was quoting them, actually. Barbara Smith, I haven't met her. I've been in touch with her once or twice. I've sent her my book as a kind of homage to their life and work. She was kind enough to once retweet one of the things that I said. So, you know, this is the thing. But these people I respect because, you know, they come. I'm an academic, you know. I am not an activist. I haven't been on the ground. Okay, I've been like involved in some protests against the Turkish government in the past. But I'm just talking, okay, and I'm writing. These people were actually suffering. I mean, Loretta Ross, the reproductive rights activist whose story I tell in the beginning, you know, she suffered. This person has been raped several times, gang raped, etc. And her only son is an incest rape because she couldn't get abortion. And this person then spent her whole life working with rapists in prison. And what did she achieve? She achieved, there was this group called Prisoners Against Rape. This consists of rapist men who are in prison, who set up their own groups and started to educate themselves. Now, Loretta Ross managed that. Now, if someone who has been raped several times can go and work with rapists, and the story is amazing. You know, they received this letter from this huge rapist guy, you know, sodomized a woman, killed. He was in for life, William Fuller. They said, shit, what are we going to do? Should we just, because the guy says, look, I got some hold of some feminist readings. I want to learn more. This guy says, I'm a rapist. I want to stop raping. Could you help me? So Loretta and her late friend Yolanda go to prison, Lorton Reformatory, which doesn't exist anymore, for 2 years on every Friday afternoon. And the only thing they take with them is feminist readings. In the end, I'll tell you the rest of the story, which is not in the book. William Fuller, he was convicted for life. Good behavior, he's released. He finishes his life giving talks and speeches in all the different places, including a testimony to the Senate against rape. So
wow.
that's an amazing. That's my political compass. You know, that's it.
And your complaint is that the woke far left are not following a vision like that, or a model, or a strategy, something like that. So the larger question is, what went wrong? Okay, so there's my book right above there, The Moral Arc, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is bending toward justice and so on. We need this, you know, Black Lives Matter too would be the way to say it mainly. A universalism of humanity is what we should aim for, where it doesn't matter what skin color you are. It's like the least important thing or interesting thing I should know about you, or any other identity criteria. So let's just say post-civil rights movement into the 90s or whatever, what went wrong? Why are we experiencing what we're experiencing now?
I think, you know, there we might disagree, I guess, because of our politics. I don't know. But I believe that it's late stage capitalism, which is partly responsible. I mean, because like everything else, identity became a very valuable commodity. It was I use this analogy because I see my students grow up with it. The new iPhone models, you know, you have to get the new one as soon as it's out. So identity became, you know, a thing, you know, sexuality, gender, all of them, and identity. I'm not saying it's only because of that. There's a huge part of the problem, I believe, is social media as a facilitator and as an amplifier. Because
do you mean, just back to the first point, that sort of a commodification of identity politics? There's money to be made here. So all the DEI training programs, Ibram X. Kendi charging $20,000, $30,000 a talk to come in and tell a bunch of white people how racist they are in a corporation, and he gets paid for this. You know, books to sell millions of copies. That's what you mean by the commodification?
Not only that. Yes, that plus moral value, moral commodification. Because when you claim that you have a certain identity, your status is increased. You know, victimhood has become a moral status.
Yes. Okay, I agree with that.
So it's not only I mean, of course, capitalism is trying to make profit out of everything. Fine. And you have DiAngelo. I mean, there's a reason why DiAngelo and DEI and everything have become a thing in 2020 after George Floyd's murder.
Yeah.
You didn't have that before.
Right.
That's also when Black Lives Matter came into being, but that's a completely different thing, obviously.
Right. Yes, the DEI, well, I love that you present the studies that show they've had no effect whatsoever in increasing diversity, much less making people that might have some subconscious racist attitudes less racist, even though there's no evidence for that either.
I mean, research upon research proves that these don't work. They're counterproductive. That goes also for some of the new fashionable terms like trigger warnings, microaggressions, and all of that. They do increase. That they don't work.
Right.
And I'm not saying that. I mean, I just reference research. All the citations are in the book.
Yeah. No, but they don't work. Why don't they work? Okay, so let's just kind of deconstruct that from an individual perspective. Most people are not racist like they used to be, say, in the 1950s and before. Most people, as I like to say, conservatives are more liberal, socially liberal than liberals were in the 50s. Everybody has had their consciousness raised slowly but surely. Even like same-sex marriage thing is no longer even discussed. It's not a part of the culture wars anymore. You know, people just accept the changes as they go. So if you are forced to take one of these training programs at a university or in a corporation, you know, there's a certain amount of resentment to it. I've had to do this every year at Chapman University. These are the lamest things I have ever seen. I can't believe anybody designed these things thinking this will do it. You know, so you overhear this is my example. You overhear two people telling a off-color joke, sex or race or whatever. You know, you should A, intervene and explain why this is wrong. B, repeat the joke to your friends. C, contact human resources. And the answer is always C. Right?
No, I mean,
it's so lame.
I mean, the whole industry, DI is ridiculous. I mean, it's just it's not only that, it's also hypocrisy. You know, it's not the money and all of that. It's just that, you know, you do all these inclusion stuff, but then, you know, you look at these, like, I mean, there's an example that I use in when I discuss this. African Americans, I mean, constitute around 40% of the population. And I mean, you know, you just put in a few names and all of that, but they still are completely underrepresented in these big tech companies, which pour millions and millions to Kendi and DiAngelo and all of that. Now, why don't they work? It's because, I mean, it's one of the problems with this kind of woke identity politics is it's because, you know, you can't change language if you don't change the mentality. Like, I mean, if I do understand and I agree that language matters. Okay, I'm that much of a leftist. I'm that much of a social justice warrior. I you know, hate speech should be no way, you know, tolerated and all of that. And this is a very continental European position. I mean, can you say that Holocaust did not happen in Germany? No, you go to jail. Rightly so. So there are certain limits to language. So it does matter. But how are you going to change language? Because I'm radicalized. It's one of the things that I didn't write too much about the book, but my own process of radicalization. And there's something that is referred to a lot in gender wars in the UK. They ask each other, for instance, when was your peak trans moment? This is a hashtag, peak trans. Like, there's a point at which, a tipping point, where you start to see, you know, you're enlightened. See, I've read your life story, and I know how you felt. There was a defining moment in your life. If you know, if you would like to share it, you share it. It's not my position. But I mean, you know, that moment, that tipping point where you decided that God doesn't exist. You know, it's something that I felt in my own life as well. With a similar story, but I mean, it wasn't God in my case, but that was my peak progressive moment. You know, I said, okay, I mean, look, if someone asks my pronouns, like if someone tells me their pronouns, I respect them. Try to respect them as much as possible, okay? But I don't ask for pronouns. And if someone asks my pronouns, I feel like using the F word as an answer. Because that pisses me off. And I'll tell you why. It's not because I don't respect people's obsession with pronouns, but because I come from a country where femicide, killing of women, is the highest in OECD countries. I worked on the Middle East, and where in Afghanistan, I know cases of where where women are not allowed to go to university or schools, where people are beaten to death in Iran, where women are beaten to death, where being LGBTQ people can actually cause your life if you live in Iran, Afghanistan, or Turkey for that matter, and by their own families, no less, you know? So, and is this, you know, I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss pronouns, and I'm not saying we should postpone, you know, the good old Marxist way, first revolution, then that. No, you know, why not? But
didn't I read somewhere that it's either Turkey or Iran where trans surgeries are far more common because you can't be gay. So if you're attracted to somebody of the same sex, you're actually just in the wrong body and you're straight.
That's also, I think, a trend as far as I've read. I definitely won't want to pass a kind of an expert opinion on that, but this is something that has been observed among evangelicals as well. Right. All fundamentalist kind of religious groups looking like the opposite sex is worse than actually like passing as the opposite sex. So it's not in Turkey, but I mean, yes, there are cases in which Muslim majority countries where this is done, and that's unfortunately quite a trend in United States as well.
Here I am, a free speech fundamentalist. I am against the criminalization of Holocaust denial. Just let them have their arguments, and we'll debunk them, and you know, hopefully they'll just go away, which they have largely. They've lost all those arguments. The reason I do that, though, the deeper principle here is once you have a law in place, it's too easy to enforce other edge examples. So, for example, there's a debate in the United States about how many Native Americans died at the hands of Europeans during colonialism, and to what extent were they intentional or, you know, just accidental because of germs, and so on. And, you know, it sort of depends on what number you start with. Was it 100 million? Was it 50 million? Was it 10 million? And then 90% of them died. That's very much. So let's say I come in on the low end of that. I go, no, it wasn't 90 million. It was more like only 6 million died. You know, am I a Holocaust denier? Right. So, you know, if there should be debate, open debate about, you know, say genocides, and that, yes, of course, David Irving, these people, they're not playing fair by the rules. Okay, well, we just show it. And, you know, he's largely lost his income and career because he was so wrong and he wouldn't play honestly and fairly the rules of historicism and so on. And that's the ultimate fate of them. They just go away because they're wrong. Not completely, and so anyway, that's my thoughts on that. I just let people have their say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not a free speech fundamentalist, but I think, you know, other than that, I'm quite liberal when it comes to opinion, you know, expression of opinion. I mean,
and also, if you tell people, back to something you said earlier, if you tell people you can't say that, then that in many ways has the opposite. If, oh yeah, well, fuck you, I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's what's happening, you know, with these, you know, it's an amazing study. I mean, that's, and actually, you know, it's, I think one of the kind of hypocrisies of the market, once they realize that these DI programs are not working properly, they stop doing research on them, you know, because, and you don't get, if you don't get funding, then, you know, thank God, you know, there's this great book by Pamela Kirk, Diversity Business, Diversity Incorporation. Well, she's done a lot of journalistic work, but it wasn't easy for her to, because, you know,
companies... So here's the question on that. Did the people promoting DI programs and desensitivity trainings and all, do they really believe it in their hearts? Like, this is the right, I'm the next MLK Jr., we're going to advance the moral sphere and arc and all that? Or is it more just as a business decision? So here's the president of my university, Chapman, who's also a good friend of mine. I said, what's the deal with these things? He said, well, in part, if you do something, you know, that we get sued for, we can go, hey, look, we got in the computer, Shermer took the course on this date, we are covered.
Probably, because I mean, I don't think there's, I mean, I've seen so much hypocrisy, you know, I mean, I know that Sweden has a certain image in the eyes of the world, like as a model society, you know, and all of that. It's, I'm sorry, with all due respect and apologies, and I am a Swedish citizen, so I'm speaking here as a Swedish citizen who lived there for more than 10 years, who raised a kid there with a Swedish mother, and all of that is bullshit. You know, they tick all the boxes. But when it comes to, oh, you can't speak about that, or you can't say, and I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying this is wokeness, okay? We're talking about, like, okay, gender equality. Yeah, but I mean, the Lund University that I worked at is the second largest public university in Sweden. And the ratio of gender inequality there is terrible. I mean, only a kind of, you know, I mean, there's a huge gender gap in terms of tenured positions. So it's not like, you know, it's only white male. It's
and clearly they're not misogynistic and racist. So that would hint at the pipeline problem, as it's called, right? There's just not as many people of color or women applying for those, say, CEO or tenure track jobs. So there's fewer to hire to make it come out equal by the percentage, even if you remove all of the obstacles there. So then that brings up, well, why is the pipeline, you know, depleted there, say, in college, undergraduate, high school, middle school, grammar school? You know, where is the problem? Is it poverty? Is it something in the home? Is it something in the public school system? Something to do with teachers? You know, because everybody's pretty liberal now. You know, they want to support women to go into STEM. Okay, why aren't there more women in STEM? You know, maybe they just are not interested. That's the other hypothesis. They have different interests than boys at a young age, something like that. And this is one of those things where, you know, everybody has data and studies on each side. So I don't really know what the answer is. I mean, but, you know, it's an open debate.
Well, honestly, I mean, you know, I do think, and I've seen the numbers and all of that, there is structural inequality, obviously. I mean, different race-based, gender-based, and all of that. But the point is, even if you remove all the obstacles, well, first of all, there is the economic issue. I mean, the working class and all of that. Not everybody gets the equal opportunities. Like, meritocracy is good on paper because we say that, you know, those who merit a position or something gets it, which is fine. But it's unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in real life. So if there were now my next step is, like, if we have an ideal situation where you do have equality of opportunity, then I don't think that you should aim for, I mean, because then it goes to this boutique feminism, you know, window shop. You just play like Netflix anti-racism, you know? You give the role of Cleopatra to a black woman and you think you fixed everything? Well, come on, you know? Now, I mean, if you want to fix it, do something else, then I'll respect it and then have the Cleopatra. That's something that other people can discuss.
There, I think people are doing it because it makes them feel like they're doing something about the problem, even whether it affects it or not. I'm looking through your references, trying to find the correct title of that book on victimhood culture versus cultures of honor.
It is called Victimhood Culture. Bradley.
Yeah, I wanted to get it right here.
Yeah, let me just.
But I was just going to ask you your opinion on to what extent you think, in terms of what went wrong, this shift from the culture of honor to the culture of victimhood is part of that, say, beginning in the 19
Let me tell you the full title. Yeah, Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning. The Rise of Victimhood Culture, Microaggressions, Safe Spaces, and the New Culture Wars. It's 2018. Well, I mean, they talk about different things. I mean, the culture and all of that. Some of it is social psychology. I think to a certain extent it's correct. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, you know, I kind of, you know, come to the issue of I hit the rock of double standards because, you know, some of the people who complain about victimhood and you know, Bradley and Jason Manning are students of people like Jonathan Haidt and, you know, Greg Lukianoff and all of that, which is okay. But I mean, you know, in these books, I don't see, like, I mean, a libertarian position is more preferable to me. And I'm not saying it because I'm on your podcast. I'm telling when I disagree with you. But it's just that, you know, because there's no talk of what happens to, you know, what the right does, for instance, the campus watch lists that, for instance, people on the right do. You know, I mean, it's not only the left who kind of seeks refuge and moral status and victimhood. I mean, the right wingers are also snowflakes. So if we're talking about helicopter parenting, I think that's the term that Jonathan Haidt would use. Well, it doesn't happen only in left-wing families. I mean, or liberal families in an American parlance. It happens everywhere. So it's like, there is now, I mean, as your, I mean, it's really hard to be an administrator in this, like your friend, the chancellor. I mean, you just have to protect yourself against any allegations, the counter allegations, not enough, payments and all of that. It's an industry.
Yeah. I liked the coddling of the American mind, and all those arguments about helicopter parenting, culture of safetyism, culture of victimhood. But Jean Twenge, since you heard the podcast on generations, she has a counter theory to that I hadn't really thought of, a generational thing based on life history theory. And this has to do with sort of thesis in that book, Generations, is that technology that leads people to live longer lives, those lives can develop more slowly. You don't have to get married as early. You don't have to have children as early. You can develop a career much more slowly through your 20s and into your early 30s. You have fewer children also, so you focus more resources on each one rather than what's called a R-selected strategy, where you have lots of children and throw them out there, and you don't have to allocate as many resources for any one of them, and so on. And so that, her interpretation of what went wrong is that everybody's obsessing about every little thing with the one kid that they have. So the kid is kind of coddled in that way, but not because of the increase in crime wave in the 70s and 80s and all that, but because of this life strategy. I'm not sure what to think about all that. These debates are constantly unfolding. We see this now with, why is there this spike in teen depression, suicidality, and ideation, cutting, anxiety, and so on. Huge spikes. That seems to be real. The question is why. Screen time, social media, iPhones, you got to turn them off at this time. Everybody's just bouncing all over the place. And I don't know what to think. What are your thoughts on all that?
I don't know. I mean, it's a real industry as well. And I haven't, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a social psychology background. My partner is a psychologist. Thank God she's helping me to make sense of some of these things a little bit better. But I think, it is a generational thing. Because come to think of it, I mean, the Generation Z is not only born into internet, but into smartphones. So it's a completely different world. I mean, there's no way. I mean, we were kind of, there are lots of little kind of TikTok videos that make fun of these things, like the Generation X, the transition, because we've seen everything. We've seen the cassettes that you roll, and now we live in the age of whatever, Twitter and TikTok, and I don't know how many of them there are now. But I mean, they didn't know. They don't know any of these things. And I think it's a completely different way of understanding. And culture plays a lot in these issues. I mean, this helicopter parenting that they talk about, for instance, is something that is very Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, etc. We grew up with that anyways. Whereas then I went to Sweden, it's the complete opposite. I mean, the kid falls, you don't even give a damn. He cries until, it's just simple as that. Even I'll tell you something that's something that not everybody learns because, of the particular experience we had. Even child oncologists, pediatric oncologists today say that, the moment the side effects of chemo subside, like the immune system is back, you send the kids under treatment to the kindergarten, because they have to continue socializing, keep falling, to get sick, and all of that. They consider this psychological bonus as much more important than a possible biological whatever infection. And it's not Sweden, it's science, you're supposed to do that.
Well, it's like the increase in peanut allergies, which would track to a result of parents protecting their kids from peanuts.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. So you have to really prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child.
Well, it happened to all of us, right? I mean, after COVID, we got sick non-stop. When we went out, right. I mean, I did have COVID myself, but then, I just had this amazing called that because basically, well, I mean, they explained, the biologist said that this is because your immune system forgot about the viruses.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, I wanted to ask you about Douglas Murray, because I've had Douglas on the show a couple times, and I know him. I like him a lot. The Strange Death of Europe. I didn't read that one. I read The War on the West and The Madness of Crowds. The Madness of Crowds, I thought was, well, everything he said was true. I mean, these things happen. This is what you point out, the craziness of the woke left. So your interpretation of Douglas is not that he's wrong so much as that he's slanting it. He's not identifying the issues on the right in an equal level.
Well, I think he's crossed. I mean, and Douglas. I mean, he's been. I mean, I don't want to throw in labels here on a podcast, but I think he's crossing the line of Islamophobia and all of that. The way he talks about immigrants of Muslim origins, the way he's talking, the way he's causing up with authoritarian far-right leaders like Orban and all of that. For me, Douglas Murray is not someone that politically I can sit around the table. I mean, that doesn't change the fact that people say that, yeah, but I mean, you're criticizing the left in a similar way. Yeah, fine, but it's not only that. I mean, I cannot consider this is where, you know, I draw the line because I think there are on the right, actually, I think there are two kind of trends. One is what you would call grifters. You know, it's just want to seize the mood. Yeah, 10 years ago they were left-wing, liberals, green, and all of that. Today they're populists. That's one thing, fine. And there are true believers. I don't know which one Douglas is. Some of them I know they believe in that. I mean, like Eric Kaufman, White Shift, the author of White Shift. He was a classmate of mine. We studied at the same place. We've learned and read about the same nationalism theories. Today he thinks that the whiteness, I mean, white generation, white, I mean, he thinks that the white replacement, the great replacement theory has certain truth to it. That's not something that I don't see this as a politically innocent project.
Yeah, no, of course not. But on the issue of nationalism, I mean, what is a nation? All right, it's a collection of people with similar language, culture, background, religion, you know, whatever. You know, maybe you have a dozen different characteristics. Well, this is our nation. Okay, so it's a kind of a fuzzy set. There's going to be variation in any of those characteristics. Yeah. So, you know, I guess Douglas' argument is, you know, like when Angela Merkel opened up the borders to Germany to, you know, this seemed like a right thing to do, these Syrian refugees and so on. But they're bringing with them their culture, which is not the same as the German culture or the European culture, let's say, or in England, the British culture and history and so on. You know, sign the guest book and sign on with what we believe and you're welcome. But if you bring these other ideas that we don't agree with, then go live in one of those countries where, you know, where they believe what you believe. Why are you coming here? Because we don't want that. Something like that is the argument. Is there not a case for that to be made, that if you're going to have nations with borders, they have to be defined somehow?
Well, look, I mean, immigration is a very, very big thorny. I mean, you will have to give me another 1 hour, 40 minutes, which I think you won't be willing to do so, and neither are your followers, I guess. But I mean, you know, it's something, and I'm not dodging the question. I'll come back to Douglas Murray. But I mean, you know, this is something that we're living right now quite intensely in Turkey, because Turkey is what Europe basically, in scare quotes, dumped the refugees. Okay, that's why they're tolerating Erdogan. They made a huge deal in order to stop like millions of them there. And right now, in a Muslim majority country, there is a huge anti-immigrant feeling, not unlike the likes of Meloni and all of that. And I mean, that was one of the determining things in the recent elections. I mean, both the opposition and Erdogan played that card. So immigration is a serious problem, and yes, there are issues there that need to be tackled, and I don't have any of these answers. The problem that I have with Douglas Murray and the likes of him is not that their cultural differences don't matter. It's just that there is a sneaking, not so sneaking actually, but sometimes quite open sense that certain cultures are superior to others. And that's where I draw the line. I mean, I cannot, like, I mean, you know, it's not Douglas. I don't know what he thinks about that, but I know that some of his friends or some like-minded people say that it's okay to have hundreds of thousands of Australians or people from Hong Kong, which is a former territory okay, because Australians, you say, oh yeah, but culturally similar. Okay, Hong Kong? No, so it's the problem is, it's not like, I mean, you know, when Douglas talks about immigration, he talks about the pub is replaced by the halal butcher and people who smell like this and that. Now, that's not the way to solve the immigration problem. Then if you want to go there, then I would tell him, first of all, then let's see why there is such an influx of refugees.
Yeah.
What happened in Syria and Iraq?
Yeah. If we believe in the liberal idea of universal human rights, and we recognize a country that does not honor that for women, you know, they practice female genital cutting, they force them to wear certain clothes, they can't drive, vote, whatever. You know, so Ayaan Hirsi Ali makes this point about Somalia, for example, and many Muslim countries where she wants to defend women's rights. And then a lot of her critics are American liberals that say, oh, no. You know, that's their culture. It's none of our business what they do. Well, what happened to universal human rights and women's rights that we were supposed to defend?
Of course.
How do you square that circle?
No, that's exactly the point. I mean, that's why far-right leaders, women far-right leaders like Meloni, Marine Le Pen, etc., are using this card, and they're right. I mean, the LGBTQ rights and women's rights and all of that. It's just that I don't believe they're sincere. You know, it's not that they're, you know, because if you ask Meloni, she becomes, you know, when you go in, okay, the immigration point is kind of, there's a clear line there because it's human rights versus not respecting human rights. That's easy. But then if you ask Meloni, well, what about abortion? Then she starts sounding like a completely different person. So is she really, and I don't have an answer, I'm just rhetorically posing the question, you know, does she really care about women's rights, or does she have a certain way of womanhood that she respects? I mean, that's you know, nuclear family and all of that, you know, it's also something that divides feminists, by the way. I mean, some second generation feminists are against porn, prostitution / sex work. Even the terms, you know, create problems. I mean, one of the endorsers of my book, Julie Bindel, was completely unhappy. We discussed this on her podcast. She doesn't accept me using the term sex work because for her it's prostitution, and I respect that. I mean, you know, it's a completely different position. So this is the point with the right. If you go to human rights issues, will they? So the tricky question is, do they really care about human rights, women's rights? Or is it just an instrumental, like your chancellor friend who has to give you that training because he needs to avoid possible lawsuits?
Yeah, right.
I mean, because, you know, if I know, I mean, my friends, secular left-wing female friends in Turkey are also complaining about the way in which Syrian or Afghan refugees are acting. So I understand, and I'm not a woman. I cannot say anything about this. I don't have, I have to shut up and listen. So there's an issue there. But I rather listen to them than a far-right politician who says, oh, you know, they're coming and raping our women. Well, that's not your problem, I guess. I mean, because, it's politics is a messy thing.
We know autocrats and populists do that. Yeah, on the prostitution thing, you know, I've been conflicted about this, you know, libertarian, you know, what consenting adults do in the privacy of their bedroom is none of my business. And so I like the idea of sex work instead of prostitution. It's less pejorative. And, you know, there are some women that make a lot of money doing this. Okay, so good for them. Well, then I had Rachel Moran on the podcast. She wrote that book about her life in prostitution. And, oh, boy, that was an eye-opener. Like, that's kind of the ideal, right? You set up your own OnlyFans account and you make $100,000 a month. You know, it's like almost nobody gets that, right? Most of these women are just dirt poor. They don't have autonomy and choice like you think that they do. You know, they're really forced to do this because they're going to be on the street otherwise. And then the abuse, and even she has models like in Australia, New Zealand, and there was one or two other European countries where they, maybe Germany, where they, you know, okay, they're going to legalize it, regulate it. It's like a business, like any other business. You have standards and so on. And the women are always the first to go. They're the first to be abused. The customers, the ones that are paying, they're the ones that are catered to by the management or the regulators and so on. So it's like, okay, maybe I need to rethink this.
Yeah, and it's something that I wouldn't dare to speak too much, because it requires a lot of reading and learning. I mean, like, I know that Julie Bindel's position is based on decades of fieldwork with women who are forced to prostitution, who suffered from it. And then you have, of course, now what we can call the creme de la creme of women who choose to have a platform on OnlyFans and make hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they don't want it to be closed down. And I cannot speak for any one of them. Like, as you said, who am I to,
Right.
It's none of my business, it's just, but I mean, yeah, I mean, if seriously, I cannot have a position.
Yeah. I want to hit a couple more points in your book for everybody. This is the 5 reasons you list for why these DEI programs don't work.
Oh, yes.
First, short-term interventions in general do not change people. Second, anti-bias training may activate stereotypes. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to feel that way. Okay, in that case, I do.
Yeah.
Third, training inspires unrealistic confidence in anti-discrimination programs, making employees complacent about their own biases. 4, this training may leave whites feeling left out. And 5, a large body of organizational research suggests that people react negatively to efforts to control them.
Yes,
that's good
what
to have that on the record.
Yes, exactly. That's based on a fieldwork, empirical research, and it's not been refuted because it's quite dated, actually. And I think it's 2013, if I'm not wrong. And it's been again and again and again, it's been proven to be right.
Yeah,
which is normal. I mean,
you have a nice example here on following that of Robin DiAngelo's campaign to make everybody feel super guilty. And here are some examples about BIPOC, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That these are the sins you can commit. Repeating, rewording, explaining what a BIPOC person just said. Calling a Black person articulate, expressing surprise at their intelligence, credentials, or class status. Making a point of letting people know that you are married to a BIPOC person or have a BIPOC people in your family. My best friend is Black. Right.
Yeah,
insisting that your equity team address every other possible form of oppression resulting in racism not getting addressed in depth or at all. It's really about class. No, it's race. Loving and recommending films about racism that feature white saviors.
That's my favorite, yeah.
Asking how to start a diversity consulting business because you attended a talk and found it interesting. And finally, the final blow, not understanding why something on this list is problematic, and rather than seeking to educate yourself further, dismiss it as invalid. Okay, let me just steel man this for a second. I mean, it would be kind of an asshole-ish thing for me to say to a Black person, wow, you're really smart. I'm so surprised. I mean,
according to her, yes. Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't say that. That would be kind of a...
Well, you wouldn't say that, of course. I mean, probably. Right? But the problem is, I mean, for this kind of mentality, and I mean, I know people say, oh, these are straw men, you're just sitting at DiAngelo and Kendi are the, and nobody takes them seriously and all of that. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of, it says something that if this person, makes millions and millions of dollars and invited to all sorts of colleges, the books are always on the bestsellers list, I think that matters a little bit. As long as I see a left progressive person criticizing this, that I would, so I'm like, okay, white saviors. But this is the funny thing, because, also Robin DiAngelo tells you that first of all, if you're white, okay, ascriptive, like I can't choose to be white, my father and well, first, what is whiteness? Okay, because that's something that I say in all my podcasts. Being a white Turk doesn't make you privileged in Sweden. I can tell you that much.
Really?
Oh no. I mean, it's in the country of blonde, blue-eyed elves. I mean, one of the reasons that the perpetrator of the allegations went by, because she was anyway. So that's one thing. But then let's just say that, I mean, okay, if you're white, you're not only like inevitably racist by dint of your skin color, you're also, there's one further point, you're contributing to white supremacy. Now, this is something that critical whiteness studies, and that's actually, if you read more into these things, you find that they're distorting the existing literature as well. Theodore Allen, a black, historian who actually invented this critical whiteness studies, doesn't use the term white because he thinks that it is reifying. It's kind of essentializing identities. But then today we have this kind of Robin DiAngelo, who is white, telling me that I'm not supposed to be, I should listen to everything she says on the list. I should abide by it. Now, on top of that, I should pay her to get this advice. And I shouldn't question anything she said because she is the white savior. Like even Kendi would have been more acceptable because at least I know that, it's not a white Italian origin American. So this is this is ridiculous. This is the length to which this has gone. We shouldn't take these people seriously. Okay, let's not take these people seriously. But then who are we going to take seriously? Because if you go to a bookstore today, you see two groups of things, like the radical right, like all these from Douglas to all sorts of other things, and then you see this kind of identity politics. Nothing in between. In 2018, when I was reading books by, you would know them, like Yasha Munk, Mark Lilla, these were bona fide and Applebaum liberals, centrist, left, right, liberals. Today, the kind of identity politics that I'm criticizing considers these people are as far right.
Unbelievable.
And that's not, it's like, okay, let's just say that I am biased. Fine. Okay, fine. I'm teaching these people. I'm using this in my graduate course, the one that I mentioned earlier. I'm giving these readings. My students go read the sources, not my book. I don't assign my book. It was just published anyways. So they read the originals and come and say, why are people being so critical of this guy? He's just a liberal. Right. For instance. And that's the level of this retreat from liberalism. I mean, like, everybody is appalled, in this fight. Like, I mean,
let's pull back and look at the bigger picture as we kind of wrap things up here.
Yep.
If this all goes away and your book and others have the effect and the kind of woke craziness disappears in 10, 20 years, what will be left that still needs to be worked on? That is, what civil rights or rights revolutions do we still need to undergo? I don't know if it's trans rights or animal rights or AI rights or income inequality or, prison reform. I don't know. What are your thoughts on where the real work still needs to be done?
I mean, I would say we should first of all focus without leaving aside. I mean, it's because people always think of it as a kind of mutually exclusive position. Like, if you say that we should focus more on material side of things, it sounds as if you want to say the symbolic or the cultural don't matter. No, we've just discussed that. Nation matters. Culture matters to all of us. I mean, we may be more or less cosmopolitan or more or less nationalist, but the point is we are raised and socialized into these cultures. So yes, they do matter. But I'm saying that maybe we should focus a little bit more on economic inequalities, redistribution. We should focus more on political participation. So why aren't we discussing, if we're going to discuss what people of color are suffering from, why aren't we discussing this gerrymandering, changing of the electoral district, suppression, voter suppression, and all of that? Why don't we talk about that, for instance? And yes, on top of everything else, let's also discuss, obviously, the most marginalized groups, gender, sexuality, trans rights, and all of that, because obviously, even the solely looking at numbers show that we have something that is that requires attention and that requires to be addressed there. So this is the thing. And what attracts a lot of the ire of people in women, for instance, who are called gender critical or TERFs derogatively, is because they believe, and that's what they say, I'm just paraphrasing their argument, they believe that the rights they obtained through different ways of feminism, the first, second, and the third wave, is actually now they're losing it. because the transactivism, they say, is at the end of the day is a man's right movement. Now, the moment you say that, of course, you're called transphobic. And I don't have, as I said, I don't have a stake in this game, and I don't belong to any of these groups. But I feel at least that if a woman says that, I should listen to this person. Here by woman, I mean biological woman.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah, it's a very tricky thing. I mean, well, yeah, but
let me ask you, since you know a lot about nationalism. So I had Yoram Hazani on the show. You know, the case for nationalism, right? So his thesis is that the nation is an extension of the family. It's like the family, extended family. It's like almost like that kind of blood and soil idea. These are our people, and they're different from those people over there. Okay, I completely disagree with this guy. I recognize why we need nations. We have to have borders. This is, you know, the way it's happened for the last several centuries. But can you imagine 500 years from now, 1,000, 10,000 years from now, there's no more nations. We're back to just city-states, and with porous borders, and people can travel and trade and mingle, and there's just none of this nationalism stuff that's really as corrosive, if not more corrosive, than religion used to be.
No. Well, let me first just say that I had a sigh of relief when you said that you completely disagree with this guy, because, you know, Yoram Hazani is a project. You know, it's funded by a particular, I mean, it's funded by CPAC. He is a far-right, I mean, the national conservatism movement is the new, it's a Trumpian movement without Trump. Actually, that's one of their mottos in many ways. So that's a very specific way of, you know, but to come to your question, I think, you know, that's something that I was the younger myself, you know, when I started writing on nationalism, I was the, you know, internationalist kind of Marxist way of thinking, no borders. Well, I learned that that's not how it works. So this is one of the things that I'm joking with Craig Calhoun with that, you know, he always said, as a left liberal, maybe a socialist, I don't know how he would precisely define himself, but he always said nations matter. We had, you know, debates in academic conferences and all of that. He's more senior than me. I respect his work. I learned a lot from him. Now I came to the point, I said, Craig, you were right. You know, they matter. So yes, I don't think we will revert to, I mean, look what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. I mean, instead of going back to city-states, we're going to empire. Well, at least attempt to set up empires. Turkey has troops in Syria, Libya, and secretly enough, Azerbaijan. I mean, you know, it's United States to begin with, and then this and that. I don't think I mean, you and I won't see that. Probably, well, I don't have kids, but your kids won't see it. No, this is the reality. This is a systemic thing. Maybe it will evolve, but not in the 21st century. I don't expect that.
Yeah. Most Americans support the United States' support of Ukraine for obvious reasons. Putin is a bad guy. But then there is this little bit of pushback that it's more of the kind of war hawkish people behind Biden that want to push this in a kind of a long game against Putin and Russian soldiers. And that's why they're they are funding Ukraine. It's a longer game thing. And that this itself is not real liberalism. It's more of a right-wing hawkish, and they're controlling Biden, that kind of stuff. I know, I was just listening to Robert Kennedy Jr. He just announced his presidency candidacy.
Yeah.
He was on Jordan Peterson yesterday or a couple of days ago. And he articulates this. He goes, I do not support the Ukraine war because, then he went off on this whole thing about the people behind Biden and stuff. I just don't know anything about that subject. What are your thoughts on? You know,
oh no, that? I mean, I've been following. I'm not an expert on Eurasia, Russia, Ukraine, and all, but my Spanish family in Spain, kind of, you know, people are. I've seen the suffering, the pain, and all of that. I mean, you know, even if you know, it's not something that you can discuss with rational, reasoned argument, because on the one, yes, I mean, you can say all you want. Like Chomsky, Jeffrey Sachs, you know, all these people say that, oh, you know, the evil empire, United States, they shouldn't have extended NATO's borders. You can make all sorts of arguments, but you have someone who is throwing missiles in the middle of the streets to children's parks, to living residences, you know, bombing people who are trying to save their loved ones from a flooding, you know, dam and all of that. That's not something open to discussion there. Like human rights. That's you and I think, share one big common denominator, and that's human rights. And that's not, that doesn't mean that, I mean, I don't know what Ukrainian Azov brigade is doing to certain wars of prisoners. I'm not saying that Ukraine or Zelensky is an angel. There's no question there. But the point is, there's a huge power imbalance. Yeah. And there's a game. And of course, I don't know about Biden's real aims and intentions. I mean, the one thing that I learned is that I don't question intentions, because that's impossible to know. Yes. But the point is very open. Like, I mean, you know, Putin is there, and I mean, and his own people are not willing to fight. And let's not forget that when he declared mobilization, he couldn't get enough soldiers, and then he had to bring people from Syria.
Right. Yes, I remember that. There was a news story where they interviewed some of these young men leaving the country. You know, why are you leaving? Because I don't want to go to Ukraine and die.
Exactly. I mean, it's not. I mean, he says all sorts of, you know, Yoram Hazony-like arguments about Ukraine always being a part of Russia and this and that. Well, all nationalists say that. This is basically a myth.
Let me read the final paragraph from your book here. Do I think that radical identity politics is distracting us from the non-culture war related issues? Yes, I do. Do I believe that woke activism is an individual empowerment driven, narcissistic middle and upper middle class pastime? Absolutely. And I wonder, why are there so few progressive leftists who shout, "The emperor has no clothes"? Well, this is the emperor. This is the kid saying the emperor.
Well,
has no clothes.
Now you can imagine why I don't get any reviews in CNN, New York Times, Guardian, and Washington Post, and all of that. Well,
but Umut, before I let you go, since you suffered this personal loss of your son from cancer, I have no idea what that would feel like, other than I just can't imagine how one even goes on. Maybe you could just kind of give some thoughts on how does one go on, whatever the loss is. You lose a parent, you lose a sibling, your spouse dies, you're divorced, something hugely traumatic that you just can't imagine how you get up the next day and go to work, or how do you deal with that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, it's very personal. I mean, one thing that I learned is that reading about grief doesn't work. Reading about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages don't work. None of this works, you know. What made me, well, I mean, there are 2 things actually. One is my personality. It's like I'm a survivor. I survive by fighting. So I had to, and in this particular case, before going back to the first point, the second thing that kept me alive was anger and rage against the cancelers, against the people who perpetrated these allegations. One thing that I could never, and I would never understand, is that the person who, you know, circulated these lies about me was spending a lot of time with my son, treating him as her own for 4 months. And that's not something that I could understand. And that's what the mother of my son, when she was called as a witness in Sweden, came to court. I mean, the judges, it's like an American system, by the way, you know. There's a judge, and then there's a random jury from ordinary people. And, you know, everybody else, including us, you know, we had to take an oath. The judge asked her something, and I said, look, are you in a relationship with this guy now? No, we ended up, even before he was born, you know, we're just friends. They didn't even ask her to take an oath, because, you know, it was so sacred for them. And this is Sweden. We're very non-religious society. So what kept me going, and this is where she said, and it's all on the record, you know, I put them on my website. It's in Swedish, but, you know, there are, you know, she said that I started to feel at some point that this woman, I believed in the beginning that Umut might have done something without knowing, and, you know, unwittingly, that made her feel uncomfortable. That was an option. But then I realized that this person wasn't a personal vendetta, and she was actually trying to harm us, our family. Now that
So your
rage
point-
kept
you-
me. My point is this, because the cancel thing, you know, let's finish the circle. There are two things that I lost and I couldn't get back. Forget about all the grief and all of that. I lost two projects, and both of them were about my son. One was a memoir that I was writing about his struggle, and the other was a documentary. I lost them, and I didn't get them back. And the income of these projects were supposed to be given to kids who suffered from his cancer in Turkey. So this is what cancel culture does to people. Now, in my case, I stayed alive like that. In her mother's case, she decided to have another kid. How am I surviving? Every day is a hustle. The 5th of July is carved in my mind because, you know, we had him at home, and he bled to death, basically. He had more than 20 tumors in his body. He was 5.5 years old, and he bled to death in our arms. And I mean, you know, when you went through, like, this is the thing, you know, when I was fighting against all these other kind of bullshit in life, it's like, I have nothing to lose. I lost the thing that matters most to me on 5th of July, 2018. And that's it. Now, from now on, I'm just living. His mother told me, we're still very good friends. We don't see each other that often. I mean, we live in different countries. I have a partner. She has a partner. You know, we just have our own lives. But she told me one thing that at first I didn't believe in. And I mean, I couldn't feel it. It was like one of those like spiritual things. She told me that he would have wanted you to live the life he couldn't live. I guess that's what I'm doing. And that's
focus on life and living, and just
that the life that a children's death is not the same thing. They don't belong in a coffin. I mean, the most difficult day for us both, and as I said, he bled to death in our arms.
Yeah.
It wasn't that night, but it was the day we saw him in a coffin, his body, at a funeral, because they don't belong there.
Right, right. And your ex-partner, she had another child.
Yeah.
Is your sense, does that help? Or is it just a...
Well, in her case, it did. She's happy. Well, happy is a very relative term, but I see him, Nicola, as Luca, like he's the brother, the little brother we call him. He knows my name. He can pronounce my name, even though he's seen me a couple of times only. Yeah, it's weird. He's coping with it. I mean, one thing that now this is the thing, you know, the whole thing. I believe that, you know, this biological female, the gender and all of that, like this matters, you know, when this was my ending with another Julie's podcast too. This was when I realized that biological womanhood is a different thing. It was her mother. The last day, you know, you're put to sleep and they give you enough morphine to, you know, legally, obviously. I couldn't do it. I mean, that was the thing that needed to be done. I couldn't do it. His mother, who carried him in her womb for 9 months, she was doing that because she thought that his suffering had to end. That's the power of motherhood, and that's the power of biological, you know, we are not that powerful. No. So all the rest, testosterone, estrogen, puberty blocker, this and this. No. Is it reductionist? Am I reducing womanhood to motherhood? Well, I'm sorry, I am.
Okay. In this case, I think that's all right.
I guess.
Understandable. Yeah.
Because this is the power to give life.
Yeah.
And to take it if necessary.
Yeah. Huge.
And it's huge.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you went through that. And anyway, there's just nothing more to say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. It's terrible. There is nothing good to say. But thank you for your work. I mean, your focus on big issues does matter in terms of moral progress and humanity.
I mean, look, if anyone who's listening to you, it's the one person that I found quite helpful in reading is actually the songwriter Nick Cave, because he lost 2 sons.
Oh, wow. I don't know. But
one to suicide, another one to an accident. He fell off the cliff. He lost 2 kids. And the things that he writes, not the songs only, because he also produces, but the things that he writes on grief. I would suggest, you know, your followers, your listeners to, if they're suffering from similar stuff, that's, he knows.
wow.
He knows the pain.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I will check that out. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, Umut, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.